Long ago, in the age when heroes walked the lands of Greece and gods and goddesses watched closely over mortals, there lived a man named Odysseus, king of the island of Ithaca. He was a clever man, famed for his intelligence and wit rather than brute strength, though he was also a warrior when the need arose. His name would become legend, not only for his role in the great Trojan War but for the endless journey that followed, a journey that would take years upon years before he could see his homeland again. The tale of Odysseus is one filled with wandering, hardship, and perseverance, and though it has been told many times, let it unfold slowly here, in a way that carries you gently along, as if drifting on the waves of the sea itself. When the Greeks gathered to wage war against Troy, Odysseus had been reluctant to leave his home and his beloved wife Penelope and their infant son Telemachus. He was clever enough to sense the dangers of war and the whims of the gods, yet bound by honor and oath, he joined the expedition. The war lasted 10 long years, and during that time, Odysseus proved himself not only as a fighter but as a man of cunning. It was his idea to build the great wooden horse that would allow the Greeks to sneak inside Troy's walls, ending the war with deception rather than strength. Troy fell, and the Greeks returned home with pride and weariness. But Odysseus would not find his journey so simple. He longed to return to Ithaca, to the rocky shores of his island, to the halls where Penelope waited faithfully and Telemachus was growing without his father. Yet the gods had other plans, and his voyage home would become a trial stretching another 10 years, as if fate wished to test him beyond all measure. When Odysseus and his men set sail, their ships were filled with spoils of war and their hearts with relief. They thought the hardest part was behind them. Their first stop was the land of the Cicones, where they raided the city of Ismarus. But their greed and recklessness turned the tide against them, for reinforcements came, and many of Odysseus' men were slain before they could escape back to their ships. Already, their homecoming had begun with bloodshed, a sign of troubles to come. The winds then drove them toward a strange land where the Lotus-eaters dwelled. The people there offered Odysseus' men the sweet fruit of the lotus, and those who ate it forgot their homes and their purpose. They only wished to stay, to eat more, and to drift into a dreamy forgetfulness. Odysseus, with his sharp mind, saw the danger in this. He dragged his men back to the ships by force, tying them to the benches so they could not wander away, for he knew they must not lose themselves in such empty pleasures. From there they came to the land of the Cyclops, one-eyed giants who lived without law or kindness. It was here that Odysseus' cleverness shone brightest. He and his men entered the cave of Polyphemus, a huge Cyclops who trapped them inside with a massive stone. The monster devoured several of Odysseus' companions, and escape seemed impossible. But Odysseus devised a plan. He gave Polyphemus wine to drink until the giant was drunk, then declared his name was Nobody. When Polyphemus slept, Odysseus and his men drove a sharpened stake into his single eye, blinding him. The Cyclops roared in pain and called for help, but when his brothers asked who was hurting him, he could only answer, "Nobody is hurting me." Thus, no one came. Odysseus and his men clung to the bellies of sheep as they left the cave, escaping under the nose of the blinded giant. But Odysseus could not resist boasting. As they sailed away, he shouted his true name, and Polyphemus prayed to his father, Poseidon, god of the sea, to curse Odysseus' journey. That single act of pride would make the seas hostile to him for years to come. Next they reached the island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus and, wishing to help him, gave him a bag containing all the contrary winds, leaving only the west wind free to blow him home. For 9 days they sailed, and Ithaca's shores came into sight. But Odysseus, weary from watching over the bag, slept at last. His curious men, thinking the bag was filled with treasure, opened it. The winds burst out, driving them far away from home again. Aeolus refused to aid them a second time, saying the gods must despise Odysseus. Their wanderings then brought them to the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. The king and his people fell upon Odysseus' fleet, hurling boulders and spears, smashing ships, and devouring men. Only Odysseus' own ship survived, and with it he fled in horror, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Soon they reached the island of Aiaia, home of the enchantress Circe. She welcomed the men into her hall with food and wine, but the drink was drugged, and those who tasted it were transformed into swine. Only one man escaped to warn Odysseus, who went to rescue them. Guided by the god Hermes, who gave him a magical herb to resist Circe's spells, Odysseus confronted her. When her magic failed, she yielded, restored his men to human form, and became his ally. They stayed with her for a year, feasting and resting, though Odysseus never forgot Ithaca. At last, she advised him to journey to the underworld to seek the wisdom of the prophet Tiresias. Thus Odysseus sailed to the land of the dead, where he performed the rites and called forth the spirits. Tiresias warned him of many dangers, of the cattle of the sun god Helios, which must not be harmed, of the wrath of Poseidon, and of the trials that awaited him even after he reached Ithaca. Odysseus also met the shades of his mother, who told him of the sorrow at home, and of great heroes who had perished at Troy. It was a haunting journey, filling him with both dread and determination. When they returned to the living world, Circe further advised him on how to face the perils ahead. He would pass the island of the Sirens, whose song lured sailors to their doom. To survive, he ordered his men to stop their ears with wax, but he himself wished to hear their voices. He had his men tie him to the mast, commanding them not to release him no matter how he begged. The Sirens sang with voices sweet and terrible, promising knowledge and delight, but bound fast, Odysseus endured, and his ship passed safely. Then came Scylla and Charybdis, the twin monsters of the strait. On one side was Scylla, a creature with 6 heads, who would snatch sailors from the decks and devour them. On the other was Charybdis, a whirlpool that swallowed the sea and spat it out again, enough to sink a ship whole. Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla, knowing he would lose some men but not all. 6 of his companions were seized and eaten, their cries echoing in his ears, but the ship sailed past the greater doom. At last they reached the island of Thrinacia, where the sacred cattle of Helios grazed. Odysseus warned his men not to touch them, remembering Tiresias' prophecy. But while Odysseus slept, hunger overcame them, and they slaughtered the cattle. When they sailed again, Zeus struck the ship with a thunderbolt, destroying it. All the men perished, save Odysseus, who clung to the wreckage and drifted alone. The waves carried him to the island of Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso dwelled. She took him in and loved him, offering him immortality if he would stay by her side. Yet though the years passed, Odysseus' heart remained fixed on Ithaca. At last the gods decreed he must be allowed to go home. Calypso, sorrowful but obedient, gave him a raft and supplies. He sailed once more, though Poseidon still sought to hinder him. A storm wrecked his raft, but he washed ashore on the land of the Phaeacians. There he was welcomed and told his story, from the fall of Troy to his long wanderings. The Phaeacians, moved by his sufferings, gave him a ship at last to carry him to Ithaca. When Odysseus awoke on his own shore, he did not reveal himself immediately. Athena, goddess of wisdom and his constant guide, advised him to disguise himself as a beggar. For in his long absence, suitors had overrun his palace, pressing Penelope to choose a new husband. They feasted on his wealth and plotted to kill Telemachus. Penelope, faithful and cunning, had delayed them by weaving a shroud by day and unweaving it by night, but her trick could not last forever. Odysseus, in disguise, entered his hall, enduring insults and blows from the arrogant suitors. He tested the loyalty of his servants and revealed himself to Telemachus. Together they plotted their revenge. Penelope, still doubtful, proposed a contest. Whoever could string Odysseus' great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads would win her hand. The suitors tried and failed, one after another, for none could bend the bow. Then Odysseus, still in rags, asked for the chance. With ease he strung the bow, and with a single arrow he passed it through the axes. In that moment, he cast off his disguise. With Telemachus at his side, he turned his arrows on the suitors. The hall became a place of reckoning, as Odysseus reclaimed his home by blood. When the suitors lay slain, Odysseus revealed himself to Penelope, who at last believed it was truly him when he spoke of their bed, a bed he had built himself from the trunk of a living olive tree, immovable and unique. And so, after 20 years of war and wandering, Odysseus was home at last, restored to his wife, his son, and his kingdom. His trials had tested every part of him, his strength, his courage, his patience, and his cunning. His story is one of endurance against hardship, of the longing for home that no distance or temptation could erase. It is a tale that has echoed through the ages, reminding us that even in the face of endless obstacles, the heart's desire to return, to belong, can guide us through the darkest storms.